All right, welcome back to a special edition of the Carbon Cardboard Podcast. I'm your host, Bryan, Q3 Cards, joined as always with my good friend Scott at F1 Castle, not at the F1 Castle. If you ever feel like changing that, feel free, because it'll just roll off the tongue for the audio podcast here a little bit better. Scott, no F1 race this weekend.
Nope.
It's funny though. We talk about there being next year or this year 24 races, and it's a lot, and all the drivers and teams are just like, we can't handle anymore. As a fan, we kind of wish that they went 52 weeks, but it's just not feasible.
No, yeah. I mean, obviously, especially all the logistics and everything that goes into, shipping those cars, their crews, teams, everything across the world. Obviously, we're getting very close to the breaking point in terms of how many races we have. But yeah, it's, I wish it was easier to put on a race, right? Wish it could be like a basketball game where they just show up and play. But yeah, obviously a lot goes into a race. So yeah, that makes all the races that more special though.
Yeah, you definitely have some to look forward, and there's quite a few really good ones coming up. So just quick announcement here. Apologies to all of our listeners and viewers. My audio last week was a little messed up. We did a little... we brought it back to the factory. We decided that I was actually recording out of my webcam and not this microphone. So apologies. Yeah. We got to figure it out. DRS is now engaged here. So,
right.
Scott, we did talk about it at the opening here. This is a little bit of a special edition. We are going to talk about, as you can see here from the title, our picks, speculation, pontification, our 2025 driver lineup predictions. Are you an expert? Am I an expert? You're more of an expert than I am, but this should be really fun. And I think what we want to do is, I feel like we made some pretty good educated guesses here. There's some sound rationale, I think, for a lot of these. And if we're thinking this stuff, Scott, as common fans and as Formula One card collectors,
right,
maybe some of these teams are thinking the same thing. You might get a little bit of a leg up on some of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, maybe, the teams are like, listen, the 2024 product is coming out. We got to think. No, obviously they don't care about the cards. But I will say, I think as the spots are starting to fill up, right? Because we just heard the news last week, obviously, that Alonso has re-signed. So that's public information now. So now that this stuff is starting to come out, we wanted to make sure we did this episode now before everything starts getting announced. Because once all of this stuff starts getting announced, it's not as much fun because there's not as many seats that are open. You can't kind of throw one off the deep end. And listen, it's funny because you may already know my choices because you've kind of had a look behind the curtain because you've got to set up everything here to get it going for the show. But I don't know yours, so I'm really excited to see what you picked and where we differ and where we're the same. But yeah, no, I'm excited to get into it.
And as always, shout out to F1 Ben. He's a legend.
The legend.
All right, so we're going to get into this. So the format of this is we're going to go through all 10 teams. There's only, I believe we were just talking before we hit the record button, there's only 2 teams that know their driver lineup. I'm sure some teams already know because they just haven't announced it. But outside of McLaren and Ferrari, there's seats open on every other team. What we're going to do is we're going to go through the current team standings, starting with Red Bull, going all the way to Alpine in 10th. We're going to go through each one. We're going to talk a little bit about what we feel like, what each team is looking like before we reveal our picks. I'm going to reveal mine. We won't talk about it quite yet. Then we're going to reveal Scott's on screen. So this would be a lot better to watch on YouTube, but we will also explain what's on screen for those of you listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those other fun things. Be sure to leave a like and review and subscribe and all that other fun stuff. And then we'll start to talk about it, and Scott will lead that off, and then we'll go back and forth. So again, as nobody is really surprised, I'm the point guard here. Scott's the opinion you really want to do, but I hope some of my picks are pretty good here. I thought I thought more than about 5 minutes about some of these, so I'm hoping they line up with what Scott's thinking. So
Listen, at the end of the day,
this
this
is for
is
fun.
exactly this is fun. I mean, I think there should be a lot of thought that goes behind it, right? And I'm not going to say that all of a sudden, Nigel Mansell is going to start driving for Mercedes next year. But like, I think it's also it's an opportunity to make some educated guesses and hopefully maybe throw a couple for fun picks out there. But yeah, I think everything that I've put together, I know at least could happen. There is a reality where these things could happen. I'd certainly like to see them happen. But yeah, I think let's get into it.
All right, so on screen we have Red Bull. So on screen you can see the nice graphics that we've got. I'm on the left, Scott's on the right, and we're going to talk about this. So Scott, Red Bull, this second seat to Max Verstappen is always talked about. Going back several seasons, this is nothing new. Max is the benchmark, and if you're not as good as Max, you're seen as replaceable. And to be quite honest, Checo's done a really good job. Like, is he doing what Max is doing? No, but I don't know if anybody would, even in this car. He is just that good.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Max is the benchmark, and the second seat is the bench warmer. So I think Perez has done a great job so far this year. He usually does start the season strong. I think ultimately it'll come down to, does he continue throughout the season with this consistency? Can he put in those second place finishes every time that Max is bringing home the win? And can he tally a few wins of his own? And then I think that's the spot that they'd love to see him in.
All right, so drum roll, please. All right, so my two picks. Although there's a lot of silly stuff going about Max leaving, Max is not going to leave, guys. Max Verstappen, and I'm saying Sergio Perez retains his seat and gets his new contract. Actually, there's a little rumor going around that he might get a new 3-year deal, which is kind of amazing if you ask me. So, Scott, you also have Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez.
Yep. And it's funny because, I think this is actually like a fairly bold decision. Like, it seems like it's pretty vanilla. Like, oh, okay, they're just gonna, Max obviously has a deal through 2028. They're just gonna re-sign Perez. Okay, but I mean, with everything that's been talked about, it just news reports just came out the other day that Mercedes, like AMG, not Mercedes F1 team, but all the way up at the top, Mercedes has approved a massive package offer to Verstappen that would be the largest F1 driver's salary in history. So that's still floating around, that they're trying to lure Max away. People are pretty divided on whether they think Perez will get that second seat. Some people want to see someone else get a shot in the top car. Some people think, maybe Carlos Sainz. Obviously, Alonso can't go there anymore, but there's other options like Albon. I think Perez will get it done. I think he will continue the season with the consistency he's shown so far this year. And I think they are not looking for Max 2.0 in that second seat. No. I think they are looking for Sergio Perez, and I think they sign him.
And I think at the end of the day, Sergio, whatever he says publicly about wanting to be world driver champion, he knows this is the best spot for him. So, and he is able to make many millions of dollars a season. And if I was Sergio, I would sign up for this again. So,
yeah, you always want to be in the fastest car you can, right? And right now that's Red Bull. So, yeah.
Second in the constructor standings right now is the Scuderia Ferrari. Forza Ferrari. There's not really, and I'm just going to skip right ahead to here because we've already talked about this. And actually, last time we talked about this too, with did they make the right decision with Lewis Hamilton? Go back an episode, and hopefully the audio isn't too horrible with me talking about it. But this is locked in. Maybe they wish they didn't preemptively sign Lewis Hamilton and potentially keep Carlos Sainz. But, Scott, from a shareholder investor standpoint, Lewis Hamilton is one of those like transcendent, not even, he's more than an athlete. I mean, he's an icon.
Oh yeah.
And that's why Ferrari made this move.
Yep. I mean, he's a superstar. Obviously, like, first of all, he's a 7-time world champion, or 8 asterisks, depending on who you talk to. So, I mean, he's one of the best Formula One drivers of all time. That is not up for debate. He is absolutely phenomenal. Is he at the top of his game right now? I think we'll have to see. But this is, if we want to talk about, this is the sexiest team, right? Ferrari. And he's the sexiest driver in terms of the appeal. He has the biggest fan base, bar none, in Formula One. Ferrari has the biggest fan base. It is a marriage that makes sense. Lewis Hamilton on Ferrari, something that had often been rumored, never been solidified. It has been now. It was massive news when it came out. And it's kind of died down since then. Trust me, when it comes to off season, in between 2024 and 2025, it will be the biggest storyline. Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari. I think Ferrari makes, even if Ferrari could have gone forward in time and seen how well Carlos Sainz has done so far this year, I think they make the same decision 10 times out of 10. You don't turn down Lewis Hamilton. I think it's amazing. I think it's great for the sport. I think it's going to be good for him. I think he needed a little bit of a fresh start after the way things have gone the last couple of years for him. So I'm extremely excited for it. I think Leclerc and Hamilton is absolutely, without a doubt, one of the best pairings on the grid. And I'm really excited to see how it plays out, see who wins out in that battle.
Yeah, no, I the one thing that, since we last talked about this too, is I guess I underplayed that, those things that you just highlighted there about Lewis and the other things that he brings to the table, not just
Right.
the wins currently, or current form, because I mean, he might already be thinking he's already on Ferrari. And I know we do know that he has not been shy about complaining about the W15, so
Yeah.
and the 14 and the 13.
He goes, wow, that red car is fast, huh?
Oh yeah. All right. Again, the other one that is fairly straightforward. We're not projecting any changes here because both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, Scott, both have long-term contracts. And you've talked about it on recent episodes. You also just talked about it a little bit on the Fanatics Live single stream you just had, that, McLaren is pretty firmly, in your opinion and mine and many others, that they're the number 3 team right now. They probably need some upgrades, Scott, to take that next step, and it doesn't seem like it's coming in the next race. However, on talent alone, and just especially from not just based on performance, but based on potential, and potential is a dirty word, both Lando and Oscar Piastri are both, I feel like, very desirable in the card market just because of the potential that they hold. And neither of them has a race win. Oscar does have a sprint win, which I don't necessarily know if that technically counts towards a Grand Prix win total or not, but who's going to split hairs on that? Scott, save me here. I'm rambling. This is still a really good pairing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you're talking long term, right? If you were to start a Formula One team and you look at all the different driver pairings around the grid right now in 2024, this is one that would be extremely attractive. Lando Norris is pretty young. And Oscar Piastri is one of the youngest drivers on the grid right now. So you're pretty set up for the future, right? And now, Norris had just signed a new deal. Piastri was already locked in for a multi-year. I mean, I think this really makes sense. Do I think Oscar Piastri needs to up his race performance a little bit? Yeah, I think so. I think that is really the skill set that McLaren was looking for him to take a step forward on this year. I think qualifying wise in 2023, he was pretty close to Norris, especially towards the end there. I mean, he was actually getting the better of Norris, and Norris was pushing, so much. He was making some mistakes towards the end to make sure he was on Piastri's level. But I think overall qualifying, Piastri is right there. if not just a smidge behind Norris. But it's really the race pace that he needs to pick it up a little bit. I think McLaren would have maybe hoped he had improved a little bit more by now, but it's very early in the season. We've only been through a handful of races. So, I think as long as Piastri improves his race pace throughout the season, McLaren will be extremely happy with, hey, we've got a great young pairing for the long term. The regulations are about to change in 2026. We're going to go into 2026 with both of these drivers, and they're going to feel really good about it. And I would feel really good about having this driver pairing as well going into a new set of regulations. So yeah, I think this is a no-brainer. It was already locked up anyways, but yeah, McLaren, Norris, Piastri for 2025 is a slam dunk.
Now things get a little spicy. So currently fourth in the constructor standings is Mercedes, AMG Petronas that we just talked about. So one of these seats is locked in, so that will not be a surprise here. So George Russell is signed for next year and beyond. They do have an open seat, and as we just talked about with Max Verstappen and several others that potentially have been linked to this seat, this is where we now put our thinking caps on and decide what is the best option for Toto and the team at Brackley. So they're in Brackley, right?
Yep.
Okay. I threw that, came to the front of my mind here late on a Sunday evening at 10:30 Eastern. But okay. All right. So let's get to it without further ado. So again, my picks, then Scott's, then we talk about it. All right. My pairing, George Russell, Carlos Sainz. Scott's pairing, George Russell, Carlos Sainz.
There we go.
There we go.
Spicy. You were foreshadowing.
I was.
With your spicy comment.
Yeah, I'm not too smooth. Sainz is by far a smooth operator. He's had a smooth operation lately. Yeah. I mean, Scott, we just repeat like what we've talked about recently. It's a little funny though on paper to have essentially swapped Lewis Hamilton for Carlos Sainz under our guesstimate here, which I think there's actually even rumors that he might already be signed to a 1-1 deal, which is, for 1 year and then either an option to the driver or the team to continue on for the following season. This just makes too much sense. And as we've talked about, Scott, like there's outside of Max Verstappen, I mean, I think you'd have to argue that Carlos Sainz is probably the next like locked in driver right now. In terms of form, he just overcame an operation, an injury, and the strategy side of things too. It's very like Alonso-esque with what he's doing out there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I 100% agree, right? Sainz is at the top of his game right now. I think he is literally in his prime. I truly believe that. I think we saw signs of it. Signs of Sainz greatness back on his McLaren days. Actually, if you think back, go back to 2019, Carlos Sainz was an extremely hot commodity. I mean, it was no surprise that Ferrari signed him. I mean, he was, pretty handedly beating Norris. Granted, it was Norris's rookie year, but I mean, Sainz was talked about in the paddock, looked at as one of the best drivers on the grid. And I think, a shaky start with Ferrari maybe, shook some folks' confidence in that. But I think Sainz has gotten comfortable with the car and the team, and he is firing on all cylinders. I'd put him up against just about anybody right now. I think he is the best option. If Mercedes is looking for who is the best option for us as a driver right now, if we're looking to score the most points and maximize our results, it's going to be Carlos Sainz. And I think, and I mentioned this on our last podcast, Mercedes options are dwindling, right? Like as Alonso gets signed and other people are getting locked in, and then, Sainz looks around and, Aston Martin was a potential option for him. But if he doesn't, go to Mercedes, or if he doesn't sneak his way into Red Bull, I mean, options really start to drop off after that. So I think, he wants to maintain a competitive seat, right? He doesn't want to be stuck in the back. in, a Stake, F1, Kick, Sauber, or
Hmm.
Williams right now, which are, some potential options for him. I think Mercedes makes sense for both parties. I think initially when Lewis was signed to Ferrari, and there was rumors of like, oh, well, signs coming to Mercedes, it makes sense. Everyone's like, it didn't sound attractive to Mercedes fans. It's like, oh, we're giving up Lewis and we're getting Carlos. Like, come on. But now, I mean, so far this year in 2024, I think he's kind of proven all those people wrong. And I think a lot of those same people that were against it initially are here for it. They want it. They want to see signs in black overalls. So yeah, I think it makes sense for both parties, and I think it'll happen.
And I mean, George is probably one of the more technical drivers on the grid. I mean, he impressed at times in his Williams. I mean, that the lap that he did in the rain at Spa 2021 when he put it on second, on the front row, the race that never was essentially.
Yeah.
That was just amazing. There's times when he just essentially blacks out. But then there's times like when he hears like Carlos Sainz is going to win the race and he hits a wall. So this might be a spicy take, but I think it's not a shoe in that Russell is the number one driver with Sainz on board in this scenario. I think it's definitely potentially a 1A and a 1B. And as soon as Sainz gets comfortable with the car and if they can make it competitive, I think he might outperform Russell. So, as you just said, with Mercedes fans might not thinking that this is the best option as a cast off from another team. And Sainz has jumped around because he was a Toro Rosso and then Renault and then he went to McLaren. I think people have in their minds like during Drive to Survive when he was basically just shown the door out of Renault that like, oh, this guy isn't any good. But to your point, he did really good in the McLaren. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And I think, the dichotomy of the team will settle itself out. I mean, at least Russell will be the team leader. Maybe it won't be like a number one, number two driver, but Russell's been with the team. He's going to come, he would be the team leader in that scenario just because he's been with the team. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be the number one driver. But I don't think there's, any ill will between these two drivers. I think they make a good pairing and they'll get along.
Aston Martin, and actually, like we just talked about, Aston Martin locking down Alonso was one of the reasons why we're like, okay, this was something that we wanted to do, at the beginning part of this year when we're launching the podcast, and we're like, yeah, this makes sense to just do this now because the more, like you said, as the more we wait, the less fun it'll be because there's not as much speculation because there was like 12 seats open that aren't
Yeah.
locked in. I mean that's
There's a lot.
this is going to be a really big silly season. If we were even half right about most of these, I think that would be pretty cool. So Aston pulling in. When are they going to Honda powertrain? Is that next year or the following season?
2026. That's with the new regulations. Yep. So they'll still have Mercedes engines for 2025.
So as I keep giving little breadcrumbs about my potential picks here. So Alonso is locked in. Lance Stroll is the current second driver. And I guess we'll save our opinion of that because I know both of our picks at this point. So I know how this conversation will go. So let's just get into it. So Aston Martin currently fifth. And as we talked about, potentially going to pass Mercedes here at some point if Mercedes can't prove to do some upgrades here. So my picks: Fernando Alonso, Yuki Tsunoda in that second seat. You have Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. Is it that bold, Scott, that I have Yuki Tsunoda here?
I mean, listen, I think it makes sense. I think I'm kind of banking on the fact of Lance Stroll's not ready to be done. I think Yuki makes a lot of sense given the Honda relationship. So I don't think it's too far of a cry. I just think that Stroll is just gonna say, "Hey, Dad, we're good, right?" And show up on first day of testing. So I don't think he's quite done yet. But hey, you never know. I feel like that's one of the seats where it's always like it's locked in until it's not, kind of a thing for Lance Stroll. So I mean, if at the end of the day he decides like, yeah, maybe I'm gonna go do something else, I think Tsunoda would make a lot of sense.
So the way I see this playing out is I think it's going to be Lawrence is finally going to say, like, I'm investing a lot of money here, and the performance difference in the same car between Alonso and Stroll is just far too great. Now, there are times when Stroll is locked in and he's able to put the car in the top 10. But the fact that Yuki's been able to score points this season is because of Stroll and his struggling. And as we made fun of him last time with that rather infamous, radio call that you're going to hear all the time.
Every category.
Yeah, every category, Stroll has been struggling. And I think just the gap there, and we're not talking Fernando Alonso in his prime. This is Fernando Alonso. He's still very talented. He is, he is the ever young rookie here, but I just feel like they're going to have to decide if we want to take the next step as a constructor, if we have the facility, if we have the car, everything else that's there. And if the one thing holding us back is a driver, I think they have to, I don't think Lance will be, air quotes fired. I think they'll move him into potentially like another series, or it will not appear like he wasn't picked or chosen. It will be he wants to do something else, and then they'll bring in somebody else inside to allow it to do that. And Yuki is just in really top form. So the reason I did put Yuki here is just because of that Honda relationship and his current form. So
yeah,
this was maybe my most outside of the box thinking, but I think it makes a lot of sense for Aston to have a pairing like this.
No, I agree. I 100% agree. This is a good pairing. It's a better pair, right? I mean, I think Tsunoda is by and large an upgrade on Lance Stroll, and I think you'd struggle to find someone to disagree with that. I just don't know if he's done yet, but I would love to see this. I mean, because I think it's something that makes a lot of sense. Like you said, the Honda relationship that's coming in 2026, get him in a year early, and help build that relationship with the team. But listen, Fernando Alonso, okay, you say he's not in his prime. By his own words, his last race was one of his top 5 of all time. So,
wow.
It's he's up there. But no, I agree. I don't necessarily think he's in his prime. I think he's still one of probably the top 5 or 6 drivers on the grid right now, the way he's driving. But I still think the gap between him and Stroll is just absolutely too large. It is one of the largest gaps on the grid. And for a team that wants to be competitive, wants to battle for championships, Stroll clearly doesn't get it done. I think he's just going to stay there. But I think I like your pick. I like Yuki there. I do.
All right. Visa, RB, Cash App, whatever you want to call it. Racing Bulls. AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso, whatever you want to call them. So this, obviously, now this is currently going to be a shakeup based on what I've done here. But
that's right,
Scott. You've got Zach Brown, taking issue that there's a junior team. This is nothing new. Like, they've been around for quite some time. It's potentially a team that's a feeder system, into the Red Bull. I mean, Max, Sebastian Vettel, everybody wants to put, Kimi Antonelli into Mercedes immediately, but you forget that even the top guys currently started with a different team outside of, Lando Norris. I mean, he walked right into the McLaren, but McLaren wasn't
Lewis.
Lewis walked into McLaren. So this is where it gets interesting. So we already know there's going to be a shakeup here. There's fans kind of want to shake up mid-season here with already what's going on. I mean, Danny Rick being a fan favorite, but then people are already ready to cast him aside after 4 or 5 races here. So All right, let's get on screen here what we're thinking and then have the chance to talk about it. So, one of mine will change because I just threw Yuki on Aston Martin. But again, I'm really outside the box thinking here. Pierre Gasly and Liam Lawson. And Scott has Yuki staying on board to lead the team and Liam Lawson. So we both have Liam Lawson in that second seat.
Yep.
Both of us do not have Danny Ricciardo. I guess I should probably start with this one because I'm the one kind of throwing the curveball here. Pierre Gasly. He does not. The return again. He does not look happy in Alpine. Like like that Will Ferrell, like, from Anchorman. Like, I immediately regret this decision. Like, maybe potentially look like Alpine was on the up and up with what Fernando was able to do there, but they've been a tractor. That's putting it lightly. I just think that if Gasly does not return to Alpine, what team on the grid could he go to if he wants to stay on the grid? And I think it's not maybe necessarily a tail between the legs, Scott, to go back to, RB. To me, it makes the most sense. And I still think Gasly is one of the top 20 drivers potentially on the grid. I feel like he needs to have a seat. So I put him here with RB Cash App.
Yeah, no, I mean, I could see that. I've obviously, I think Yuki stays. I didn't put him with Aston Martin, so I think he stays here. I think part of this is like, listen, I don't think Red Bull is ready to put Yuki in that second seat. I think he's a little too fiery for them to think. They're a little scared. There might be some fireworks if they put him alongside Max. So they like him here. He's done well for them. He's led the team. If they can continue to improve this car, he'll score points in it, right? And I think Liam Lawson makes a lot of sense. There's been the rumored deal that like him, Christian Horner have the handshake agreement already that he was going to get a seat in 2025 after he filled in last year, when Daniel Ricciardo replaced Nick DeVries, and then the first race in, he broke his hand. So then Liam Lawson had to come in, and Liam Lawson did a fantastic job filling in, right? And I think that was enough for, the folks at Red Bull and Visa Cash App RB to think that he deserved a seat. But they had kind of already wanted to slot Danny Rick in there in 2024. So I think it makes sense. I think he is a solid driver. He's doing his reserve role adamantly right now, or admirably right now. I think, whenever Danny Rick has an issue, the camera always finds Liam Lawson on the feed. Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think he's going to be driving for them next year. We both agree. But yeah, I think it ends up being Yuki alongside him.
All right. On to Haas.
This is where it gets fun for me. I don't know your picks, but this is where it gets really fun for me. So
yeah, no, well, I've been having fun this whole talk. So I mean, I don't. All right, so Haas. It feels like there's a shakeup potentially coming here. I think. Well, actually, I'll save that one comment so you can kind of see what I'm thinking here. Let's just unveil behind the curtain. Let's just go in. So, all right, Haas, we're predicting a change for 2025, both of us. Some a little drastic more than others. So for Haas in 2025, my picks are Kevin Magnussen and Oliver Behrman.
I like it.
And Scott's picks are Oliver Behrman, Daniel Ricciardo. I saw this. I was like, whoa. All right, explain yourself.
Right. All right, so listen.
The Ricciardo part.
Yeah, we both agree on Behrman, but as far as Ricciardo goes, right? Like I have him, leaving RB. I think he ultimately doesn't do enough this year to get the promotion to Red Bull, which is what this year was all about, right? For Daniel Ricciardo. This year coming in 2023 back end and then 2024 season was supposed to be about the resurgence of Daniel Ricciardo so that he ended up at Red Bull. He said as much. He said that the reason he came back to RB was because it potentially ends with him in a seat for Red Bull. So I don't think that materializes. And I think RB, as we both put, Visa Cash App RB moves on from him, right? And elects to bring in Lawson. You've got Gasly, I have Sonoda. But so Ricardo is left looking for a seat. And I think he gets one. I think he finds one in Haas because I think that, again, Andretti is still not on the grid. So as far as we're concerned, Haas is the American team. And I think they want to make a splash with the signing. They're bringing in Behrman. I think they want to say, you know what? Io Komatsu says, listen, we're going to bring in Behrman as the talent for the future. We want someone to help guide him along. But, I'm a little over my pairing of K-Mag and Hulk, and I want to bring in some American sponsorship glue money. Like, I think Ricardo is the perfect person to bring in and is part of the reason he's there with Red Bull right now in terms of sponsorship money. He is extremely liked, especially in the United States. So I think it makes sense. I think it may have even made sense, previously in the year that he sat out the grid, he could have been on Haas. And I think he finds his way back there. And I think it may end up being a like soft exit from F1 from him to go to Haas and then maybe later to IndyCar or NASCAR or something over in America. But yeah, I'd love to see him stay on the grid. I think it makes enough sense that I put him in here, and I hope it happens.
So I had K-Mag staying just to be that veteran presence, and I feel like he fits that team really well. I mean, they've covered it multiple different times from, behind the scenes in Drive to Survive. Even in the first season they did, he talks about being like the dirt dog type team. They had the they went to the dirt track in North Carolina and I think it was with Tony Stewart. Anyways, so I think if it's a not broke, don't fix it there. And we both, I think, are predicting, obviously, Hulkenberg to have a different team, potentially. We'll talk about that. Oliver Behrman. So we obviously both speculated that he lands with Haas. I did this because I feel like they still have the relationship to the Ferrari powertrain, with the engines that they get from them. There's not really that. I don't feel like there's as much of a pathway before, like when you saw with like Mick Schumacher going from the Ferrari Driver Academy into Haas. But for me, it just makes a lot of sense from that aspect of get Behrman on the grid. He's going to be in a Haas, but if he can show that he can be competitive where other drivers, and we've talked about in the past, when you've got like Leclerc in the Sauber or George Russell in a Williams, they might not have the best machinery with them, but they can extract things out of a car that shows talent. And then the teams, Scott, up the grid feel more confident putting those, those drivers in their car. They have to show it in Formula One. It's very rare to go, as we just talked about, to go from F2 into a top team and not miss a beat.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think Behrman makes perfect sense, right? I mean, I think he did the job in Jeddah in a Ferrari. He didn't crack under the pressure. He had an amazing performance for his first time ever in Formula One. And I think that performance alone almost guarantees him this seat in Haas. Now, he needs to make sure he doesn't completely fall apart in F2 because he hasn't done amazing in F2 thus far. It's a shame that the one time he got pole position, he ended up having to go to Formula One and race instead of go to Formula Two. But I think he'll turn it around in Formula Two. I don't know if he'll win the championship, but I think he'll finish somewhere in the top 4 or so. And Ferrari has seen him perform in F1 machinery, and that is ultimately always going to outweigh like pre-category F2, F3, Super Formula, etc. performance. So I think he's done enough already. He just needs to not lose it. It's his seat to lose at this point throughout the rest of the Formula 2 season. I think he does enough. I think they sign him. I would love to see him on the grid, and I think it happens.
Quickly about Oliver Behrman's card market. I I really think like people have already baked in him driving for a team like Ferrari. I don't think his prices are reflecting him driving in a Haas.
Oh, I think that's silly. I think anyone who thinks that he's gonna, I mean, how can you bake him in at Ferrari when Lewis and Leclerc? I mean, I guess people think long term that he'll be
Longer
there.
term, sorry, let me
Yeah, yeah,
rephrase that. Longer term, I think they feel like he's going to be in a top of the
yeah.
grid, top front of the grid type of a car.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Ferrari is the ultimate landing spot for him, right? And I mean, I think it's easy for people to make that assumption, given that he's driven a Ferrari in a Formula One race, right? So, and given the fact that they signed Lewis Hamilton, which while extremely, you know, talented and an attractive relationship and driver pairing, it's one that you don't see Lewis racing there for 5 or 6 years, so it's one that potentially Lewis races there for a few years and then retires, and Behrman would be the one that they would slot in if everything falls into place and he does the job at Haas. But he does need to do the job at Haas, right? It can't be another Mick Schumacher scenario where he's putting in the wall during the cool down lap. Like it needs to be a solid performance and earn your stripes, and then hopefully he'll be suiting up in red in the future.
All right, on to Williams, and I've lost track of where they actually are in the constructor standings right now, but we have not talked about Williams yet really at all. So both of these seats are up for grabs. At one point, Alex Albon was very hot commodity. I feel like that has cooled, and maybe it's because he keeps putting it into the wall, but he is very talented. I still think he's one of the, potentially the top 10 driver on the grid. He doesn't currently have a car that reflects that. All right, so let's get into our choices here.
Might not have a car in general.
Might not have a car in general. Yes, that's very true. All right, my picks are Alex Albon and Kimi Antonelli. Scott's picks are Alex Albon and Kimi Antonelli. So we probably, I know why we were probably thinking this, and when I saw the graphic come up, I was like, yeah, I had a feeling we'd probably think very similar here. I guess, Scott, for me, before I throw it over to you, I mean, just like what we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes here, you might have the next potential Max Verstappen. He's got to get some experience, and Williams is not technically a junior team to Mercedes, Scott. However, James Vowles is there. They have Mercedes power unit. Makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's been obviously, George Russell took that route, previously went to Williams, did his time, and then ended up at Mercedes, maybe a year too late for him, unfortunately, given the car that he received when he got there. But I think it's not even necessarily a, hey, we need to get Antonelli in the car as soon as possible. Like, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if he did 2 years in Formula 2, given that he skipped Formula 3. Like, I don't think it would be terrible, but I think the issue is just that Logan just isn't getting it done, right? And at some point, you gotta just cut your losses. And I think for them, it would make more sense to get Antonelli in the car, get him some Formula One experience, and see what he's made of. Because ultimately, like I said earlier, junior categories matter, and how you perform in those categories can be an extremely large indicator of where you're going to be in Formula One. But it doesn't mean everything. Like Max didn't win Formula 3 championship. Esteban Ocon beat him. How did that turn out? Like it doesn't mean everything. So I think they'll want to see how he does in Formula One. I think Albon makes sense because I think his options ultimately, while they looked like, oh, maybe Red Bull will sign him, maybe Mercedes will sign him, and everyone was talking about, he was the next best thing. Yeah, things haven't gone necessarily that well for him so far this year. And I think those other teams are just going to lock in kind of, more consistent options, or options that at least they're more comfortable with. And Albon at Williams as the team leader makes sense. And I think, ultimately he'll look around and decide that, yeah, it's the best place for him for at least another year. And he signs. And then it's kind of, he's the veteran there, and Antonelli's the young rookie. And I think Albon makes a really good benchmark, right? That they're seeing that Logan doesn't live up to Albon's benchmark, but if Antonelli can, maybe that gives Mercedes more, more of a reason to upgrade him to their team in the future.
Yeah, no, for sure. So if this holds serve and we see this in 2025, you're going to want to potentially next year in 2024 grab some of these Kimi cards. I think he's already going to, if you think, I feel like if you think Behrman cards are very desirable, I feel like the Kimi ones are going to be even more so. Even though Behrman did get that, nobody predicted that test was, I mean, not even the test, that he was going to get that drive when he did. Because, actually, his market had actually started to dip a little bit right before then, and it just went, poof, and it hasn't looked back. So
yeah, absolutely rocketed. But I agree. I think there's been no hype like Kimi Antonelli in recent times. Like, no Formula 2 driver has had that in the past 5 years. So no, his cards will be expensive out of the gate, and especially if he's signed. I mean, if we're coming into next year and the new product gets released 2024, and it would be his future stars card, and he's already been signed to Williams, yeah, you can bet your behind that
you might as well just treat him like an Oscar Piastri card at that point. So
pretty much, yeah.
Stake F1, soon to be Audi. This is where it gets. I guess this is fun for me to kind of think outside the box in terms of what to do, and actually,
kick the can a little.
Yeah, look at all these puns. This is awesome. I made a last minute switch on one of these because I had, and I'll talk about afterwards what I show here, but I had one driver that I was just like, I could see this, but then I'm like, I don't know. I went with the safer option, I guess is what I'm going to say on one of my drivers here. So Scott, is it going to be Audi in 2025 or that'd be 2026?
2026. So next year it'll still be Stake F1 Kick Sauber.
Okay. So I think where we're going with this is potentially laying the foundation for what that will be. Maybe we're a year too early on one of these, but it's still fun to talk about. So my two drivers are Nico Hülkenberg and Valtteri Bottas. Sorry, it's really late here and I'm tired. And you've got Nico Hülkenberg, Zane Maloney. And you teased this a little bit on one of your streams recently.
I did. Yeah. So I'll talk about Maloney first, since we both put Hülkenberg there. But so, I mean, I think for me, I'm pretty certain that at a minimum, at least one driver is going to switch. I do not think there's any way that they come back with the same lineup of Bottas and Joe. So I think at least one of them is gone. In this scenario, I've put out both of them are gone, because I think Bottas retires and I think they move on from Joe personally. Now, the reason I put Maloney in, because you think right now they have essentially two junior drivers, two young drivers. They have Théo Pourchaire, who just won Formula 2 last year, mind you, right? And the year before, he finished a close second to Drugovich. So he's had a pretty good F2 career, right? He hasn't had the best start in Super Formula. Granted, it's only been one race, new cars to him over in Suzuka. It's a tough track, but he didn't do well. And they don't race that often in Super Formula. I think there's only 6 more races. I think they do 7 total. So, and granted, there's 2 each week, but he doesn't have that much time to prove himself, and they didn't sign him last year. And I think if Zane Maloney continues to dominate in Formula 2, I think they they put him over Pourchaire. I think they just move on. He's the next hot thing. And part of my thinking behind this is it's stake F1 kick sour, right? Like if you know anything about the company, right? Kick is a streaming platform, you know, made by Aiden Ross and owned by Stake, by the way. And then Stake is an online gambling, resource platform. So they want to do something that makes a splash, right? They came out with the whole Unleashed platform. Like they're trying to tap into social media, do all this stuff. So they want to do something that's exciting. And while Nico Hulkenberg, who I have there, I think is more of like the inlay for Audi. I think that's Audi kind of coming to them and saying like, listen, we want Nico in the car. So put him in the car. And they're like, okay, Dad, yeah, we'll put him in the car. And so then they go, okay, they get in the boardroom. They go, how can we make a splash? How can we do something that's exciting? And I think they end up with the boy from Barbados. I think they kick it to Zane Maloney. And I think at this point, wow, I've got Behrman, Antonelli, and Maloney. I have 3 drivers coming up from F2. Will that happen? I don't know. Would I love to see it happen? Absolutely. So yeah, I'm going to throw Maloney in there. I don't know how realistic it is, but it certainly would be exciting. And if he wins Formula 2 by 40 or 50 points, I mean, hey, why not? Give him a shot.
Yeah, all great points. I didn't even consider him at all. So obviously, for the same reasons you did to get Nico in the car for that German connection. So actually, what I did have here was I was going to double down on the Germans. I actually thought potentially Mick Schumacher could be potentially an option here.
It is.
However, and he still could be. However, I went with Valtteri keeping the seat over Joe just because Joe, although he's a nice kid, and I can say that because I'm far older than he is, seems like a really nice guy, nice kid, but just hasn't really shown it. And does bring in quite a bit of sponsorship, but like to your point, like they need on-track results. I mean, Bottas does have 10 race wins, all coming with Mercedes. So if in a better car, he at times still shows speed and fat, like he shows quick, like even at Suzuka, like a track that he's won at, even in a really poor car, he's still able to perform. And then, he was, he really got kicked to the curb with the really slow pit stops, and that's not really his fault at this point. So I just think that makes a little bit more sense on paper. And again, I could very much see a scenario where Bottas is just very comfortable with what his F1 career was. He had aspirations of being a World Driver Championship, just like many of the other guys on the grid do. But I think reality will set in at some point. However, I still think he makes sense. And Hulkenberg still hasn't got a podium. So, I mean, they do want to hopefully have somebody that has won a race before.
Yeah, no, it could definitely make sense. I've actually heard some other people talk about that exact same lineup. So I definitely think it makes sense. He's got the mullet. They're going all in on that, from a social media perspective. He has been doing pretty well. He was in the battle for points in Suzuka before that pit stop. So yeah, I mean, I like it. I think your lineup is definitely more realistic than mine. But I'd still like to see mine.
All right, bringing up the rear with Alpine. And obviously, as we've talked about with all these different things, and we have one more slide to show afterwards about like in memorandum of all the people that we feel like will be off the grid, especially with Scott, because he's been really thinking outside the box here. But obviously, you're going to know that one of mine will change just based on, putting Pierre Gasly on RB Cash App. So this team's it's just not good right now. There's a team that's been, was pretty solidly in the top 5 with Ocon and Alonso. There seems to be a little hope. This team still feels like they have the structure and, they, whatever the 100 race plan was that just, completely went out the window. There's rumors this team is going to be sold. Maybe this is a team that Andretti could come in and take over. I don't know. It doesn't look good. Doesn't look good for the rest of 2024. 2025 doesn't look that much better. let's talk about their options here. I think Pierre Gasly stays as team leader.
Nope.
And
You mean
Jack.
Ocon?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Jeez. Yeah. Ocon stayed. Did I say? I said Gasly. Anyways, Ocon. I was looking at Ocon on my screen. So Esteban Ocon stays on as team lead. Yeah, we won't edit that out. We're going to show that we don't do any editing on this thing. That's amazing. This is all one take, everybody.
That's right. One take, everyone knows the rules.
And Jack, how you doing as the second seat? You have Pierre Gasly, not Ocon, staying on as team lead with Jack. How you doing? So shout out to F1 Ben.
That's right.
One of the biggest Jack doing fans that I know. I think we're pretty much on par with what we're thinking here. We just chose like what different driver here. But the interesting thing that I will point out here that we'll show in the next slide here, Scott, is some of the drivers that will no longer be on the grid, and to not have Esteban Ocon on the 2025 grid, that's tough for me to like think about, because I mean he has a race win at Hungary, so that's tough.
Danny Rick has 8 race wins.
That's true.
So I mean, listen, I think it's hilarious, by the way, that Alpine comes up and the driver that we're the same on is Jack Doohan, who is, while I think we think it makes sense, and I think a lot of people in the F1 card hobby would agree, F1 Ben would certainly agree, and certainly profit very much, as he's got one of the largest Jack Doohan collections in the world. But I think it's a very long shot. Like this is an outside shot for Doohan to actually get this seat. I'll just go out and say that. I would love to see him there, and I think he deserves his chance in Formula One. And I think that unfortunately, if it doesn't happen for him next year, I think it's pretty much gone. But I would really love to see him do it. I think, he did a phenomenal job in Formula 2 last year. He had a car that had issues at the beginning of the season. And then once they actually fixed the issues with this car, he started crushing. Like literally, he went from like 12th in the standings all the way up to 3rd at the end of the year, past Ayumu Iwasa, who he was behind by 80 points at one point. So like Jack Doohan finished the season better than anybody. And like if they had a few more races, Jack Doohan might have been the champion instead of Teo Porcher. Like he was driving as well as anybody at the end of the season, and it's a shame that he had issues with this car that prevented him from scoring at the beginning. I mean, he was partnered with Armari Cordial, absolutely waxed the kid, and he's done a great job as like a reserve driver since then, right? I mean, he's obviously very well spoken, which while it doesn't necessarily make you a better driver, it can have an impact into how good of feedback you can give to the team, right? So I mean, there are some positives for Jack Doohan. Personally, the reason I was putting Doohan in one of the slots because I don't think they come back with Gasly and Ocon as a driver pairing. You obviously put Gasly in another team. I think they choose Gasly because I'm not 100% sure that this will be Alpine next year. Like there's been rumors that they may end up selling the team. There's been heavy American celebrity, investment in this team. And listen, I hate to say it, and whether it should have an impact or not, but like Ocon isn't the most attractive option when it comes to, like American investment making a big splash. Pierre Gasly is much more popular. Esteban Ocon is like the Kawhi Leonard of Formula One. Like he's just not exciting. And it sucks because I think he's a good driver. Do I think he deserves to have a seat? Yeah, I do. But I think he may end up just being the odd driver out because I think they choose Gasly as the experienced guy because he's a more attractive option in terms of sponsors and everything. And then I think they bring in the new gun of Jack Doohan, and that's where I am.
So I actually put doing obviously those things kind of came into mind here too, but just because this will be one of the least attractive teams on the grid, and he is the current reserve driver, the Alpine social media team, they highlight Doohan a lot, and
Yeah.
it just seems like they're laying the foundation to potentially make that move. A lot of teams don't highlight the reserve driver as much. Maybe
It's very true. I mean, I think Alpine definitely does show him a lot. I mean, we know Ben's talked about it, right? The fact that he gets a lot of airtime for a reserve driver, and
Yeah,
he's
like with
on that one
Mercedes,
broadcast.
like Mercedes and Mick Schumacher, they're showing the three of them a lot. They show the three of these, and they just all three of them look miserable. So it's more of like it's like the miserable job that you have to take that nobody else wants, but you also do it because it's your shot to get a seat on the grid. He may even be a one and done too. We don't even know that, but it just makes a lot of sense too. And especially if this team is potentially going to be looking to be more attractive to investor, keeping driver salary down, potentially is another option, there as well.
Yeah.
So
No, that's true. So before we move on, because you teased that the next slide is going to be showing kind of what drivers we have off the grid. As for number of new drivers, I've got 4 and you have 3, right? So you'll have 3 drivers off the grid because you have Doohan, Antonelli, and Behrman, and then I have Doohan, Antonelli, Behrman, and Maloney.
I think I have 4 and you have 5.
Who is the
We'll
fourth?
we'll go to the slide here.
All
We'll go
right,
to the,
yeah.
we'll go to the numbers here. So that is all 10 teams. Drivers off, drivers out. So this is in memorandum in 2025. I think we missed Sargent. It was the one we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Even though we both threw him to the curb. So this is tough just because as a Formula One fan, you get really attached to these guys, even if you're not like if anybody hasn't noticed and if you don't realize it, like Scott and I are huge Formula One fans. Like we're
Oh, yeah.
wearing different gear. Like I've got a Red Bull sweatshirt on. Scott, you've got
McLaren.
a McLaren Lando Norris jersey on or his team
Yep.
shirt. We just love the sport, and to see guys that it's a business, and there's always going to be tough decisions to be made. It's very rare that we had the same grid that we did last year.
It's
This year.
Lawson, by the way. Lawson's the one that I forgot. Lawson was the new driver that we both had. That's how we got to 4 and 5.
Yes, that's correct. So we both have Guan Yu Zhou out, Logan Sargent out. Then this is where it differs. It was very tough to leave Daniel Ricciardo off the grid, but for me,
Unbelievable.
if he's
Everybody
not,
get him in the comments. Get him.
yeah, please do. But if he's not with Red Bull and if he's not with RB Cash App, like you had the only other landing spot for him, it would be Haas. And I just think that the Aston Martin is going to find a reason to move Lance Stroll to something else if they want to be a world championship contender. Lawrence Stroll can say it till he's blue in the face that he thinks Lance is a world driver championship contender. If he can't beat Fernando Alonso, he's never going to get there. And Alonso's not getting any younger.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
So yours, Scott, you've got, again, with Joe and Sargent, Valtteri Bottas, both stake drivers, kicked to the curb. Esteban Ocon, we just talked about. And then maybe not as surprising with Kevin Magnussen. And, I mean, he could very easily just not even feel like he's fired because, I mean, he has a young daughter now. She's at the paddock quite a bit. I think a lot of people like Kevin Magnussen as fans, but he also is very divisive too. And his driving style, you hear the other drivers on the grid, Scott, complain about him a lot for swerving and just he's like that like Draymond Green of Formula One.
Jeez, yeah. I could see that. Yeah, I mean, as far as the 5 that I let go, right? I mean, Joe, I just don't think has done enough. And it's could he continue to drive on the grid? Yes. Is he the worst driver on the grid? No. But I think it's more so, Audi is coming in, right? And they're going to lay the groundwork for that. And I don't think Joe is a part of their long-term plans. So he's out. Sargent hasn't done enough at Williams in the year and change he's been there. Unless he has a miraculous turnaround the rest of the season, I think it's pretty clear that he's going to be out. Bottas, I think he might just retire on his own. I literally think he may just retire on his own. He's got his girlfriend in Australia. They go out, they do vacations all the time. They have a nice, maybe, who knows? Maybe they start a family. I just think Bottas is towards the twilight of his career, and I think he makes a decision to walk away. I also think that Kevin Magnussen retires. I don't necessarily think that it's a like Haas, kicking him to the curb, and kind of like you said, he's got a young daughter and a family, and I think K Mag thinks, okay, I'm gonna hang it up. I'll let you guys, bring in whoever you want to bring in, and I think he makes a decision to leave. And then I think the only driver really that is contentious here for me, I think, is Esteban Ocon, because I think he is absolutely talented enough to be on the grid. I just think he doesn't have the appeal. If Alpine goes the way that I think they're going towards like American investment, maybe they even become Andretti, who knows? I don't think he survives that. Now, that might not happen until 26, 27, 28, and maybe he's got a seat for a while. But I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, and I'm going to say it happens in 2025.
So you think Ricardo for me is out of the off the grid is a bigger one. I'm thinking Ocon for you, but I think overall, I think there was some sound decisions. Like at the end of the day, like we just talked about the opening. This is completely for fun. We have no inside information. This is just speculation, pontification.
Toto was talking to me on the phone the other day, and he did mention.
That's what I did say. You were hanging out with George, and you saw his phone from Toto blowing up. But oh man, this was fun. We'll have to, but it's hard to say let's do this again because I don't know if there's ever going to be 12 seats again open anytime soon.
Well, I mean, here's the one thing I will say. Because obviously, on the whole, our predictions have been fairly outlandish. In the fact that you have 4 drivers leaving the grid, I have 5 drivers leaving the grid. That's a lot. That doesn't happen often. But you have to remember, we literally have the same lineup in 2024 that we had in 2023. At the end of 2023, we left 2023 and came into 2024 with the same exact lineup. And that was the first time in Formula One history that has ever happened. And if you don't think that isn't going to be followed by a bunch of changes, I just think we're going to see a lot of mix-ups. I think, and maybe it'll be more driver swaps. People going to different teams, and it won't be as many new drivers entering the grid. But I think it's more fun. And I really want to see new guys get a shot. I think that was one of the things I thought was a big shame about kind of having the same exact lineups this year that we did last year is I really want to see some of the young kids get a shot. And I hope we see that next year. And I certainly put a lot of them on the grid. So
So again, do not use this as any kind of card investment advice. Do not think that people were kicking off the grid that you need to go sell their cards. It's just even down the grid. I mean, I just saw Golden pulled the Kevin Magnussen, the Kevin Magnussen Super Auto for Caitlin, which was super awesome. Just
that card.
Yeah, it's but even down the grid, you can have favorite drivers and stuff. You don't have to collect, the big guys like Max Verstappen and stuff because those guys are expensive.
It's true.
Oh boy, man, this is fun.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, we'll try to do this every year. There won't be as many, shakeups potentially, or maybe we'll be completely wrong, and there will barely be any changes, and then it'll be 2026. That's the year that there's all the big shakeups. So who knows? But we'll have to revisit it either in the off season or early next year as well. But yeah, this definitely was a lot of fun putting together these lists, and I think seeing where we were different was entertaining for sure. So hopefully everyone else thinks so as well.
Yeah. So please leave your choices down in the comments below.
Let us know how terribly wrong we are.
Oh, I know that I'm gonna get tons of comments about some of mine, but oh well. So what happens when you put your opinion out on the internet?
Yep.
So before we wrap up here, we mentioned we're on Apple Podcasts now. Great if you could leave us a review there. We'd greatly appreciate it. Leave a like, subscribe, all that other fun stuff. We are now on Spotify, obviously here at YouTube. We're both on Instagram. That's pretty much our primary spot to get a hold of us there for sure.
Right.
Scott, any breaks and stuff coming up? I know you just had your Sunday single stream a little bit ago.
Yeah. I mean, just had a 1-1. I'll leave it for next time, but we just had a pretty exciting pull in our last break. But we've got a 1-1 Chrome Sapphire case break coming up. By the time this airs, maybe there'll be a couple slots left. There's not much left. But yeah, the one other thing I'll plug is, guys, every Sunday now we're doing Sunday singles on Fanatics Live. F1 Sunday singles. Had a fantastic show earlier today. Had a great show last weekend. Last weekend was on Saturday, but now we're going to try to be consistent and do it every Sunday, or at least every Sunday that I'm around, and at least once a week. It's been a lot of fun. We've had a lot of people come in, some good deals for folks, and some solid sales for everyone. So yeah, I think it's been great so far. We're going to continue doing it. Hope to see more people in there, and folks can buy singles of your favorite driver.
Absolutely. All right. So before we ramble again for another like 70 minutes here, all this has been a lot of fun. We should probably cut the cord here, Scott. Bring us home.
That's right. All right, guys. Well, remember, collect your cardboard and keep it carbon.